We are officially on. Tanya, can I ask you for an introduction or to begin us on our journey for the day?
For sure. So, welcome everybody. Welcome to the first edition of Meet the Masters series for Studio Virtuoso, and we are pleased to have Miss Elizabeth Borowsky with us. I have always found Elizabeth to be a source of constant inspiration, both musically and personally. So, you are a composer, you are a pianist, you are a music educator, you are a yogi, and you are so much more. So I would like my first question for you for today would be maybe to give us some context. So you grew up in an extremely musical family. And for those who don't know, Elizabeth's mother is a renowned cellist. Her sister is a cellist. Her brother is a violinist. And her father is an extreme intellectual. I would like to know your relationship to music was shaped how growing up in that kind of environment. Was there competition within the home, and how was it to be there? And also going out in the outside world as a student, how were you able to relate to others in terms of like non-musical students or individuals coming out of non-musical backgrounds?
Thank you, Tanya. We only know what we have experienced up to a certain point in life. And so, growing up as a very young child, I only knew what I thought was perfectly normal. You were surrounded by music and you spend your time practicing every single day. And it took a little while before I realized that perhaps this was the normal that my parents envisioned for us, but might not have been normal for the rest of society in our lifespan, right? I'm the oldest of three, so I was part of the vision and creating this normal. My brother is a violinist, but he's 4 years younger than me. And my sister is a cellist, but she is 5 years younger than him. So that age span, I think, really did make a difference in terms of setting everything in place, one kid at a time. And then it was my responsibility as the oldest to set a good example, to encourage my brother and my sister to play together with them, to be a good role model in lessons and at home. And then, of course, who did I look up to? To my mother. And here's something unusual. We had many young people living with our family growing up, and that's something you might not know, but my parents often hosted international students who would live with us for 1 year, 2 years, 4 years, from China, Japan, Poland, Germany, Indonesia, and they were young musicians. Most came to study with my mom, and us three kids would live in one room. We had one bedroom that we shared. My father built a bunk bed for us, and then we would have students in the other rooms. So you can only imagine how it was a very specific way of growing up, having every room of the house full of people making music. You don't think that there's anything unusual about it. Sure. At some point, I go to school and I realize, okay, not everyone is practicing and taking lessons, but it was certainly something that I was proud of for a very long time. It was part of my identity. It was part of my superpower. It was part of the, oh wow, I have this really cool skill that can be shared, that can be enjoyed, that can be admired to a certain extent. And it's something that I enjoy as well. It's something that, now I appreciate it even more. Is my haven, is my sanctuary from the rest of this busy, crazy world. It's my way of recalibrating my brain and my spirit and my body in a time that I give to myself. But then it was obviously, just part of the schedule. My dad is not officially a musician. I loved the way that you described him. He is a visionary who has a background in political science and sociology and history and religion. But because of my mother, because of their long, long, long relationship, has a great understanding of the arts and the music and truly believes that music has the power to bring people together and people together for good. And so we grew up with that mentality, with that message, and the performances that we gave together as a family, which we still continue to do, and that started very early on when I was 8. My dad was sick with cancer and had been organizing a conference in Bulgaria. And my parents said, okay, dad has to stay home for his surgery, but you're going to go. And I left alone with an American delegation at the age of 8 to go to Bulgaria to perform. And that was my first international set of performances. And that was, again, that was my normal. It doesn't make sense right now, but it did not seem extraordinary. And so in those years and decades to come, we traveled together to some 35, 40 countries in different configurations. Me and my brother, me and my brother and my sister, me and my mom, me and my dad going and performing. And my dad would often say, okay, well, while we are in Lithuania, let's learn about their history. Let's learn about their culture. Let's meet with the people. What can we do to come back here and work beyond being just a musician, just a classical musician? How can we connect with communities and help them connect together? Let's learn about what are the challenges that they have faced. How can you maybe write a piece of music that puts their history into music and then share it next year when they have this anniversary of that occasion? So that just gives you a taste, and we can maybe go into some of the details a little bit later on about this kind of unusual childhood, but that was inspired through my dad's vision, beliefs, my mom's incredible career as a soloist and as a teacher, and then being the oldest of 3 kids that were sharing this experience together. What's also important to add, I think, just so that maybe this gives it a little context, is that my parents are both immigrants to the States, and we don't have any other family relatives in the US. Everyone is in Europe. So there was also that kind of like isolation, for better or for worse, that made us closer together as a family unit. And I think music was absolutely a very important part of me understanding my brother and my sister, and them understanding me, in the sense that we understood the daily investment of time for lessons. We understood what it is to go to a lesson and receive feedback and work on it. We understood the stress of a performance, but the joy of a performance, and the lifestyle of watching and being part of it, right? So that's all part of it. You mentioned competition, and I'm happy to say that maybe because we have 3 different instruments, that could be, thinking about that there was not a competitive element within the family as far as music is concerned. We were really pushed to work together as a team. So that's the introduction to my musical life.
Wow, that's extraordinary. Did you come naturally to the piano? Like I think I know the answer to that. But did you come naturally to it, or was it highly recommended to start the piano as a child, or were you drawn to it?
So truthfully, I don't remember life before piano, so I can only tell you what was shared with me, because I
Okay.
began shy of 4 years old, and it has been part of my life for so long. I don't remember not playing, not learning, not having it in my life, right? But I am told that my mother wanted to start me on cello. She's like, my firstborn child, of course, she will be a cellist. That is what we do. We make our son or daughter like us to begin. But they did have a piano at home, and had a guest who came and sat me at the piano and said, okay, Elizabeth, baby Elizabeth, could you curve your fingers when you play? Okay, here's a note. And then said to my parents, she's very good. She must take piano lessons. And apparently that is something that I gravitated to and preferred to strings. My brother chose violin. I'm quite sure that my mom wanted him to play cello, but he saw a violinist and wanted to play it. And we love what we love, and or who we love, and that's part of our nature. My sister didn't get a choice, as far as we know, because she was the third and the last one. But for better or for worse, it is the perfect fit for her. She absolutely is a cellist through and through. And so it worked out perfectly. The three of us formed a piano trio. It was years before we could really play together, like serious music. If you think about the span of ages, by the time I was in my teens, my sister was still 5, 6 years old, right? And so it took a little while before we were actually playing pieces together that were serious. But it was fostered obviously by my parents, but even by people who would encourage it. Again, the people who would be in our lives, the friends of my parents who would come over and say, oh, could you play something for us? And maybe that might be something interesting. There was no such thing as a social event without music being part of it, without playing. So birthday parties, and when guests would come over, and holidays, it was always, there's also a concert. Even if I was 15 years old and my friends were all over, okay, but there's going to be a concert and everyone who can play is going to play. So that was part of it. But we had a composer friend when I was probably about, it was in 2000. So I was actually already 17. And he said that he would surprise us with something that he thought that we would like. And a month later, we received a package in the mail, opened it up, and there was music. And it says, to Elizabeth, Emmanuel, and Francis Borowsky, may you enjoy great harmony in your life. And it was a trio that he wrote specifically for us. And it was really with the intention of the piano might be the hardest part, then violin, and then cello was a little bit easier because she was younger. And that ended up being our first taste of really playing some real music together. So it was fostered by many different angles of experiences, and worked out perfectly. Great as a pianist to learn from string players. I'm constantly telling my students to think like a singer, think like a violinist, like a violist, like a cellist, the way that they phrase. Obviously, I work with many string players these days. So being able to coach them, not by playing, I lived with string players for most of my life, but can I play violin? No. But can I understand it and help you with it to an extent? Yes.
Yes. Okay. Very nice. And okay, so this was your upbringing. This was essentially the foundation of who you are now in many ways. And your mid-career at this point, what do you take away at this point in your life from a life of teaching, composing, and performing, both musically and personally?
To me, life is about relationships more than anything else, and music is one way of exploring those relationships. To an extent, that relationship with myself, because as musicians, we have to know ourselves, our fears, our challenges, our weaknesses, our strengths. We're always straddling that balance between pumping ourselves up and like, I got this. This is going to be great, and oh, that was terrible. Right? And we need some of both, right? In our practice room, we need to be listening critically and figuring out, how do I improve? What do I improve? What do I want to sound like? And how do I get there? But then at some point we remind ourselves, and it's so important, no matter what our goals and what our levels, why are we doing this? We're doing this largely for ourselves because we like the sound, we like the experience, we dream of playing. So there has to be a joy that comes in to balance the self-criticism as well. And we better enjoy the process, right? We can't just enjoy the product. We have to love the mistakes. We have to laugh at the mistakes. We have to laugh at the challenges that we have, and find a way to enjoy that same process of growth. Excuse me, I had a cold a few days ago. I might at some point grab some water. So first is a relationship with ourselves and with our instrument and with music. And then it's a relationship with others, with our teachers. My teachers have been some of the greatest influences in my life. And not just as a musician, as a person. They've been role models in the way that they relate to me, that they relate to their audience, that they live their lives. And I think, that's a big deal. And now it's a responsibility that I take seriously as a teacher myself. I might just be a music teacher. Maybe I'm just teaching piano to that student, but sometimes it's more than that. Sometimes it's the human being, element that is going to help the musical element. And it certainly influences in one way or another. And then composer is an interesting element because it is the inside out of music. It is the secret language behind the notes. It is the imagination. As a kid, I loved reading books. I would go to the library and come home with a big stack of books, and I would prefer to read those books than practice. Truth. So my mom would actually have to remind me and say, "Okay, it's time to practice," and I would try to sneak a book onto the music rack and maybe be reading while practicing my scales or etudes or playing by memory. And sometimes she couldn't tell, but most of the time she could, and she would catch me, take the book away, and okay, it's time to practice. But I don't know if it's specifically from that, but I enjoyed improvisation and making up my own music. And I think to an extent, it was like, maybe if I play something that sounds like I'm making music, I can keep reading. And that kind of eventually filtered into improvisation, into reimagining pieces of music, and then eventually into composing. So composing has been an outlet that has allowed me to imagine what if, and to help my students imagine what if. What if Chopin lived in 2023? What if Mozart lived in the time of Scott Joplin? What if this phrase was not finished? What are 10 different ways that it could have been finished? Okay, let me show them to you. And now let's see what is actually on the page and appreciate it and enjoy it. And why did the composer choose this option versus that option? And how do we communicate that to our audience? And I think that being faced with choices as a composer, it's infinite choices. I can always, choose to make it longer, make it shorter, do it in higher octave, a lower octave. And it, for someone who appreciates choices, but sometimes can feel overwhelmed by choices, it's something that I take seriously. Then when I finally decide to put something on a piece of paper, it's for a reason. So the majority of the time, I would say that if you see something on the music, you see instructions from the composer, it's for a reason. They had many, many choices, but they chose what they thought at that moment would be the best option. So then we have to have the imagination and the curiosity to think, what else could it have been, and why did they choose this pathway, and how can we embrace it and be part of it? Okay, so we traveled a little bit from your question, but the concept was, what do I take away from that life in music? It's relationships, it's imagination, it's love, it is constant exploration, constant growth. I will never be bored, ever. There's always more to be learned and more to listen to, more to be enjoyed. It's one of the greatest gifts that we can have, that there's always potential and there's always enjoyment, and to meet other people through teaching them or playing with them or learning from them, what an incredible gift. Yes.
Okay, that's very interesting. Um, so here's a tough one. How do we stay authentic to ourselves as musicians, as artists, in our high speed, high consumption world? Do you have any advice for musicians, budding musicians, trained musicians? How do we block out the world when we sit in our practice room at the studio? How do we do it?
Okay, so the last question is perhaps the crux of it, and the most practical one. When we're practicing and we have a million thoughts and to-do lists that are infiltrating, and I always have a piece of paper and I'm taking notes of, oh yes, I have to do this after I practice and that. So I do have a notebook and I'll write things down so I'm not thinking about them. So that, okay, I wrote it down and that's for later. One of the best things you can do is literally turn your phone off, and I don't mean on silent, like literally off, power off mode, out of sight. Have an analog clock that you're looking at, because otherwise it's been proven as time and time over again that even the concept of having a phone in the same room is going to impact your ability not only to focus but to absorb your retention. Your memory of the music changes depending on your interaction with technology. There's a wonderful musical psychologist, Noah Kagayama. He's probably #1 music psychologist of our time. He has a blog. It's free. Look it up, The Bulletproof Musician. And there was a study that he indicated probably about 3 months ago, in which people would either browse Instagram or Facebook or TikTok up to 30 minutes before practicing. And anything up to 30 minutes before practicing, when they then, finished the study, okay, how fast did the group A or groups B or group C learn their pieces? How much were they able to memorize, and so on and so forth? The ones who had interacted with phones and social media and emails were significantly less developed in their progress than those who had maybe taken a walk, who had done some stretches, had a glass of tea or water, or some quiet time preparing their body and their mind for the practicing. Okay, now granted, I'm not great at following that example. I can do better, but I understand it in theory, and especially for those who are in the stages of really developing as a musician. I mean, yes, we're all constantly developing, but if I think about if I had cell phones when I was 10 or 15, I would not be where I am today. I am so lucky that I grew up before then, so that yes, the books were a distraction, but that was it. Once they were out, that was it. But there is a certain truth to being able to just say, yeah, we have this low tech instrument and we have to devote fully ourselves to it as best as we can. So that was kind of the tail end of your question. The first part of your question, I think, was like staying authentic to yourself as an artist in the world. To me, it is to be curious, to be open, to look at the world around you every day as a new day, as to learn something new, to see something new, even in an environment that is constantly maybe part of your same journey, but you notice something every day. I think that's really important, because maybe with your music, you practice the same piece every day. Can you feel something different? Can you notice something different? Can you share something different, even if it's the same notes on the page, because you're playing
Mhm.
someone else's music? I find a lot of inspiration from being outside. I live in a beautiful part of the country in which I have ample access to many, many, many different trails. And every day it's different. Even if I went on the same trail every day, which I don't, but different season, different temperature, different wind. Are there leaves on the trees or not? Is there snow on the ground or not? Oh, is it the first flower? Is it a mushroom? Do I hear different birds singing in the woods? So for me personally, that feeds a lot into my existence.
Very nice. And how has your yoga journey, because you're a yoga aficionado and you're a yogi, how has your yoga journey impacted your music playing, making, even musical perception?
I would say that it is primarily physical, but we should never underestimate the relationship between the physical and the mental. Okay. So it began some probably 20 years ago, and I would attend classes and just notice that I felt very good. That it was a way of exercising my entire body. And though even as musicians, we think about, I play with my fingers, I play with my hands, with my wrists, with my elbows, with my arms. Oh, wait, but the arms are connected to the shoulders, which are connected to the neck, which are connected to the back. And if one thing doesn't feel good, then it quickly infiltrates the rest of your body. So we do have to take care of ourselves. And although we play with our fingers, I would say I play with my whole body. If you watch my performances, I'm drawing that energy from my back, from my core, even from my legs. As upper strings players, you have a disadvantage in that you are unbalanced and then you are asymmetrical in the way you play. It's not, okay, I practice like this for half an hour and now I switch and I do it this way. Right? So there's an asymmetry to the way that you are developing the use of your muscles, to the way that you are holding yourself. And I would strongly advocate for self-care in terms of how outside of your practicing, you're taking care of yourself. So, maybe Raphael, you're very young and you look very healthy and flexible, and you're like, I don't have those problems. And I am not ever wishing them on any of them. I feel young, and I feel like most of the time my body agrees to do whatever I do. But what I've learned is that an ounce of prevention really is worth a pound of cure. That not only am I preventing physical problems that could cause pain or inability to play, I'm also helping myself as a musician. I'm helping myself become more aware of tension even. It's like, what does it feel like to feel relaxed? What does it feel like to feel good? What does it feel like to feel strong and flexible? And how do I find that in my playing? So for instance, when students exhibit tension, most of the time they have no idea. I'm like, do you know that your shoulder when you're playing is raising up? Do you know that you're tensing your chin or chewing, or that one finger is lifting up as you're playing these fingers? Do you know the face you are making when you're playing, that it's tension? And it's hard to separate that, desire to do well and to push through something that's difficult and find an ease within that. But it's so important. If you learn a difficult passage with tension, you will always associate that passage with tension. You will always have tension creep in. So how do you bring it down to a level of, I can play this so slowly with perfect intonation, with perfect tone, with love. I can breathe while I'm playing it. I can also play it with expression. And now I'm going to trick myself. And this is something I do with my students. I'll say, what is the difference between this tempo in this tempo? And you might say, I don't hear the difference. That's because one was 105 and one was 106. But if you can do something at 105 and then you do it at 106 and then 107 and 108, and yes, it's a very slow progress, eventually you make it to 140. And is there a difference between 105 and 140? Yes. But instead of jumping and causing stress and panic, because think about it, like, when am I stressed or panicked? When I'm late for something, when I'm in a rush, when I feel like I don't have enough time. When am I most likely to drop my coffee or trip and fall or do something stupid? When I'm in a rush. And the same with our practicing. When we're in a rush, then we're doing things that we may not even realize to ourselves and making it harder in the sections that we don't need it to be harder. They're hard enough. So how can you break it down and actually go, I will right now feel like it's so slow and I'm not making progress, but I'm going to teach it to myself like I'm a 3-year-old. Okay, you can do this. Good job, right? And then you do it a little bit faster until it becomes easy. And I guarantee you, I don't have data to back me up, but I guarantee you that you will make more progress, and that piece or element of a piece that is causing so much stress will become something that, instead of hating it or fearing it or hoping to survive it, you can create a different relationship with it.
Yes. Okay. Now, can we ask you, as musicians, we're always overcoming new challenges, whether it be, like I have a feeling you might have come to composing subconsciously you came to it very, very young, but maybe putting yourself out there with printed copies of your compositions and with your students playing, I think you came to it a little bit later in life. So within our own musical practices, we all overcome new challenges where we have to put ourselves out there, whether it be a new piece, something that's very, very challenging, or a new technique, or a big concert coming up, or something, a recording, or something that's just a little bit outside of our comfort zone. How do you find the courage to put yourself out there?
Um, I had so many thoughts as you were sharing that because there are many different levels of putting yourself out there. Sometimes it's something very obvious and big, and sometimes it's something very small. Sometimes you have the choice, and sometimes seemingly you don't. I mean, you always have a choice whether to do something or not, but sometimes I feel like that choice may have been made for you. So I'll give you an example of that last one. Um, my brother, sister, and I were in Germany for a residency. We were living in a castle for 3 months, and our job was to basically play music. At the end of the residency, we were supposed to give a concert. And we read an article in the newspaper announcing the concert, and it said that we would be premiering our own composition, a trio, about this incredible place. And this concert was in 2 weeks. And we're like, where did they get that idea? And then we read it, it was in German, and it was my dad. My dad told the reporter that we will be composing a piece, and we had never done anything like that. So guess what? We could have said no, but we're like, okay, let's make this happen. And it ended up being our first composition about the legends and the history and the imagery of this. So that courage came from circumstances. And I will say that very often when we look at people, excuse me, who we deem courageous, it's because the determination was greater than the fear. Right? So you have a choice to be scared or to go, but my love for this person is such, or my desire to save them from this situation is such. I'm thinking of like fires and terrible life circumstances in which, yes, there's fear, but you're like, first and foremost, I have to go and rescue my sister or my dog or my cat or whatever it is. So you think about the determination first, and only afterwards you might go, oh wow, that was really scary. I was in danger, right? So it is something actually that I tell my students, that they need to be so musically determined. What do they want to do? What do they want to say? What do they want to communicate? Not just, oh, I want to play well and I don't want to mess up. That's not strong determination. That's going to cause fear. What is your story? What is the story of these notes, of this piece? What did we work on this week that even though you know this piece very well, that you still are like, I have to remember when I get here that we're going to play with this new expression or articulation or time. So you're constantly thinking ahead to what you want to do in the piece, as opposed to what is happening now or what happened. I interviewed a basketball coach some years ago, and I asked him about his players and their training. And one thing I asked him about was repetition. I said, my students get very upset when I say, you have to do this passage 20 times a day, every day this week. And they're like, 20 times? Why not 3 times? And I'm like, 20 times, because it needs to be in your system. Is there anything in basketball that's like that? And he said, well, yes. When in basketball, I don't know who follows basketball. Anyone? A little bit. So I don't watch the games very often, but there's something called a free throw in which you have a player.
Raphael follows basketball.
So,
Raphael.
and you know
No, no, you
you know what
don't follow.
a free throw is, right? So they are given the opportunity at a certain point, the game stops, and they're trying to make that basket, and it is prescribed place and a prescribed distance. So there are elements, in a game that are constantly changing, but that one is the same. So at any rate, I asked him, okay, how many times do your players have to throw a free throw? Yes. How many times every day does he make them practice their free throw during training? Anyone? Raphael.
30 times.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe 50 times?
Tanya?
50
Yeah.
times? Yeah.
I'd say 60 times.
Okay. 1,000.
Oh my gosh.
Probably a few hours. Right? So why? Because then under the stress of a performance, your physical self is like, I've done this 6,000 times this week. I know this. I had a student recently who was playing this piece of music that she's preparing for a talent show. And it's in the lesson, it was good. But then every time I would have her play it for someone else, it would collapse. And I felt so bad. I'm like, wow, she knows this so well, but she will get nervous and it just completely disappears. What's going on? And we would explore it from the theory. We would explore the choreography, the imagination, and somehow still, there would be times another student will come in and it would say, can you play it for them? And it would be not so great. And I said, okay, Nicole, how much are you practicing this? And she goes, maybe 3 times a week. I'm like, I needed to play this 10 times every day, every single day, 10 times. The piece is very short. It's only 90 seconds, okay, a minute and a half. I'm like, even though you know this piece, I needed to be so secure that I knock on your house at 3 o'clock in the morning and you are asleep and I bring you to the piano and you can play it. You're outside in the snow, you come to the piano, you can play it any given moment. And the only way you can do it now at this point, the only thing you haven't tried is the sheer quantity of repetition. So do it 10 times a day. 2 weeks later, she has a performance opportunity that I'm part of. Perfect, flawless. Then I had her at a retirement home in front of an audience. I'm like, hey, Nicole, would you like to come up and play? Perfect. And it's been like that. It's been consistently awesome, partially due to the repetitions. Never underestimate the amount of repetition. So we have purpose, we have determination, sometimes by choice, sometimes not by choice. Well, I don't know if have I answered that question? Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was great. I think all of us as musicians and artists, and sometimes it's hard to find that courage, So yes, thank you. That was a fabulous answer. Okay, this one is a really good one. Raphaël, j'aimerais que tu portes attention à celui-là. What's the best musical advice you were given, and which musical advice would you give your older music students who are going into music or who choose to keep music on the side or like still as an integral part of their lives? But what's the best musical advice you could give any of us?
The best musical advice I got from a teacher, or at least the first thing that comes to mind, was that you can find technical solutions through artistic intention. And I just remember that blowing my mind, that it's not, okay, first I will learn the notes and then I will figure out what to do with them. But first you come up with a sense of what do you want to say? What do you want to do? What do you want it to sound like? And then know that the technique changes depending on your interpretation. The choreography that you use, the articulations change it. So it is kind of pointless to just learn the notes and then put the artistry in. It has to come together. And then when it does, then there's a part of your entire existence, your body, your physical side that helps you to find the technique. And obviously, it depends on your level of experience. If it's a technique you haven't learned before, then your teachers are helping you format that. But just remember that from many, many, many years ago, changing the way that I learn and the way that I teach. For those who are going into music, I think that musicians have to have many different skill sets, many different talents, many different interests, many different abilities, while at the same time taking their playing to the highest level. So I went to university for my undergraduate studies, which meant that I was taking classes in sciences and mathematics and in speech and sociology and acting, in addition to music theory and musicianship and sight reading and conducting and everything else. And I am so glad that I had those experiences, because the papers that I had to write, the presentations I had to give, are all something that I still use this day as a professional musician who, it's rare that we just play music. There are many skills that we need, and we draw from all of our life experiences. I would say the vast majority of my pre-college students or adult students don't desire to have a life in music professionally. They're doing it for themselves because they love this. And I support that entirely. I would say that would be my number one dream for anyone I work with. It's not, I'm doing music because I want to be a professional. No, it's I'm doing music because I love it and I want this to be a part of my life. So the advice I give them is perhaps a little bit different. Consistency matters. It's like, trying to stay in shape. You can't prepare for a marathon by training once a year. It's the daily work that will keep you in musical shape. Finding inspiration from live performances, go and see live performances as much as you can. And that's really for both sides of the equation. We learn so much by being there, and it's different than watching on YouTube, different than just listening online. Obviously listen to recordings, but go to live performances, be inspired by it. And know that your relationship with music will continue to evolve and explore different sides of it. You might love music of the Romantic era, but try some music from the classical and Baroque and contemporary eras, or something jazz, or something bluegrass. Continue to explore all possibilities, so that your relationship with music is always fresh.
I like that. Okay, so now we're coming to the end, and I would like to ask you, what are two books that have impacted your life, or even your artistic life, your personal life, two books that have really changed your outlook on life, and one recording that was very, very significant for you in your formative years.
I'm grateful that you shared with me these questions ahead of time, but because they're difficult ones for me to answer. And ironically, the first thoughts I haven't changed since then. So maybe next week I'll have a different answer. But this week, the two books are The Little Prince and The Alchemist. And neither of those are, really big or intellectual books. Neither of them have anything to do with music. But they have to do with life and curiosity and relationships and hope and dreaming, and a combination of destiny and creating your own destiny. And to an extent, I would say that I've never been a fan of things being more complicated than they have to be. And both of those books are, in a way, simple. They're quick, easy, fun reads that the more you think about them, the more you realize that there is inside of them, but they are not any more complicated than they have to be. So those are two books that I really love, The Little Prince and The Alchemist. And recordings, I grew up with my parents playing a lot of music of Frédéric Chopin. They love his music especially. And my favorite performer was Christian Zimmermann, who won the competition in the 70s. And I love his recording of the ballades. And there was the first ballade by Chopin is a piece of music that, to me, is life in a nutshell. It's like 8.5, 9 minutes long, and it has beauty and joy and hope, but also passion and trauma and sadness and grief and anger, everything in this one piece. And every time I play it or teach it, I discover something new about it. And it's been a piece that when there are moments in my life that are difficult, it could be a relationship that ended or loss, that this is a piece that I find to be extremely cathartic, that it really helps me process those feelings in a way that few other pieces can. So Zimmermann's recordings are like, for me, the interpretation of this piece that inspired that love of this music.
Beautiful. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much. I would like, if you have the will or the desire, maybe to play a few minutes of something, if it's possible for you. And I would like, if possible, if a Raphael or a Rosemarie have some questions, to think about it maybe while you're playing, and maybe just ask you quickly at the end.
I have a couple of videos that I pulled up that I want to show you in addition. So I'm going to actually move to that first. Let me just do a quick screen share, see if I can get that. Okay, let's see what we've done. So that's my family. You can see them. Give me one moment.
Oh, beautiful.
This is last August, so 2022. We were in Lithuania. And this was a piece that we wrote based off of the history of this country. And the ending segment of it had to do with this beautiful historical moment called the Baltic Chain, which I had no idea about until I started digging into their history. But I think it was 1989, that people across 3 countries, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, held hands for something like 600 kilometers to create a multinational awareness of their solidarity and their desire to be independent from the Soviet Union. So we incorporated one of the tunes into our piece. And what happened is, in the performances that we gave, the audiences spontaneously would stand up and start holding hands. And this is, 35 years ago. So this is one that happened to be caught on camera. I don't know, it doesn't seem to be making any sound, isn't it? So there we go. Let me see if
it turned really ugly really quickly.
Okay. So that was a youth orchestra, and we played as soloists with them, 3 concertos. Then we had that work that we played as soloists. And then at the very end of the concert, we played side by side. So you can see my sister, I hope you can see my cursor, she's here. My brother is next to the concertmaster, and I'm playing together with a pianist. And it was something very special. It was a fun little piece. I think it was are you familiar with Eurovision? It's like a pop.
Yes.
They had a song from that was from Ukraine from years ago that was transcribed from orchestra. And we played it with them, and it was super cool. This was a very unusual experience. This was in Cuba. We gave a concert at a church. You can see this old Steinway piano. What happened before the scene is it was a normal concert. We played music by Bach, by Mozart, by Beethoven, by just really beautiful, appropriate to church music. And at the end, the audience gave us a standing ovation, and my dad said, "You should play Guantanamera." And we're like, no, we don't do Guantanamera in a church. That's not appropriate. It's a fun song, but you would never do that, in a church for a classical audience. But my dad, I already told you the way that he functions, right? He told the reporters about this composition. He goes up to the microphone and says, "We're doing Guantanamera." And we're like, "Okay, we're doing Guantanamera." And suddenly these men come up and we're like, "Oh no, like, did we do something terrible? Are they going to stop us? Are we in trouble?" And they're like, "Wait." And we're like, "Why?" And they go, "We have to get some drums." And we're like, what the heck is going on? So this is live. This is probably one of the strangest and most beautiful experiences I've ever had. I don't know if we want to see the whole thing, but I'll show you some of it. So we start playing, he starts drumming, someone else is part of it, and then suddenly there are these nuns, religious ordained nuns, who walk up to the microphone and start singing along with us. So the power of music. Let's see what we got in here. And my mom happened to catch this. So I got goosebumps just watching that. I don't know. It's I've never had anything like that, nor anything since. And my dad was right. And there's something about playing music that people know and love that they can participate in that was just remarkably powerful. That same trip, we met with a band, and this is in Cuba. And I think it's extremely, unusual. They played the American anthem with the American flag in Cuba for us. But right.
Wow.
So there was a point in my 20s and 30s that I'm like, I just make music. I entertain people. I teach music. Anyone can do that. I'm not a politician. I'm not a billionaire. I can't solve world problems and wars. I'm not a scientist. I can't help the environment and all these things that feel like they're completely like helpless and hopeless. The older I get, the more I believe in the power of those small relationships, the student who walks in the door, and that positive energy, hopefully being as powerful as any negative energy. And I wish that politicians had the enthusiasm, the love, the openness of musicians, because I think that these few examples, handful of examples, just show strangers. We've never met each other. These were all spontaneous experiences that I think were powerful when people are open to sharing. If we look for differences, we'll find them. If we focus on our differences, we'll find them and we'll emphasize them. But if we look for our human commonality, then we can find that just as easy, and then we are in a better place to sustain the differences and find a more humane way of working through them. So that might seem a little bit naive, but my life experiences have shown me that there is something to that as well. So I will play a short piece for you. And I think I'll just play a tune I'm preparing for a Christmas show. It is the Carol of the Bells, and it's the George Winston version. It's not difficult, it's not showy, but it's beautiful. I've taught it to a few of my students recently, and what I love about it is that it can kind of melt us on the inside. It is just, there's something about it that just allows us to kind of stop and feel, and that's one of my goals as a musician for my audience. Stop and feel. Hopefully you can hear. Yes.
Yep, we can hear you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. You've definitely made us stop and feel, both with your words and your music. I'm emotional, I'm sorry. So thank you very much. Do we have questions? Raphael, do you have some questions, or Rosemary, or any thoughts or any words you wish to express to Elizabeth before we all sign off?
I want to say thank you. This was amazing. And I have a question about how you teach to kids. Like our son, we started him on piano last year and he was doing great and he decided to quit. So I was wondering if you think that it's if we have to push usually, and because you seem like someone who was really self-motivated. So is it normal to have to push a child to practice? Or
My parents had to remind me a lot.
really?
All the way through for a very long time. It's probably even harder now because there are more distractions and there are more instant gratification and enjoyment experiences available, and learning music is hard and it takes time and it's a very slow process. It's like if you would measure yourself on the door the way parents measure the child's growth, you're not going to see the progress from day to day, especially as a young player. You don't have the ability to really measure your goals and how close you're coming to them. So it's not easy. Here are some things that have helped my students. One is to agree on a particular practice time together, to say it's always going to be at 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock to 5:30 before dinner. So it's not, oh, you have to practice, have you practiced today? It's almost bedtime, you didn't practice, but it's, hey, it's 5 o'clock, drop everything, it's music time. And maybe less versus more, just to make sure that it happens and it doesn't feel any, so that you want to leave them wanting more versus looking at the clock and waiting for it to finish. A second, with my students, to an extent, I am always giving them some choice as to what they are playing. Because when someone chooses what they want to do, they are more likely to follow through. It's basic psychology. So yes, the younger students have a book of pieces, but maybe that book has 6 pieces at the same level. And I might say, present, knowing their personality, would you like this one or would you like that one? And then I help get them started through it. So the choice aspect is part of it. And then the rest kind of depends on the age, on the personality, and the particulars of that relationship.
Very good. Does that answer your question, Rosemary?
It does. Thank you. Thank you so
Super.
much.
Raphael, do you have any questions or thoughts, or maybe a thank you? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Do you write music for your students?
I do. I have about 120 pieces for young pianists or pianists of any age that were specifically written for my students. And it started about 7 years ago. I had a student who I loved him as a person, just such a great kid to work with, but it wasn't natural for him to learn. And it seemed like no matter all the different ways that I know as a teacher that would work, he hit a plateau and it just wasn't really progressing beyond. And he would do something and it would work, and then he would do it again and it wouldn't work, and he would make the same mistake. We had one lesson that I said, okay, you have to really focus, and now you have to do it 5 times in a row perfectly. He was the last lesson of the day, and this was at the very end of the lesson. And it took us 45 minutes because it'd be 1 time good, 1 time bad. Then bad again. Then 2 times good, 3rd time bad. Then he would get up to 4, and then he would make a mistake. And I was like, but I committed to this. I said, it must be 5 times in a row perfectly. And I checked in with his mom and she's like, we're free, we can stay. So we stayed for 45 minutes. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm torturing this poor kid who is a great kid, really wants to do this. How do I help him? How do we make this work? So his birthday was coming up, and I decided to write him a piece of music. I'm more of a experience rather than material gifts type of a person. It's what I prefer to get, and it's what I prefer to give. I'm like, I'm not going to give him just some stuff that sits on a shelf somewhere. Do I want to give him candy for his birthday? No, I'm going to give him a piece that I'm going to write for him that's in a style that I know he likes, but with some of the problems that he's facing, and we will work on it. And I wrote it, and I gave it to him, and it did not have a title. I said, Gavin, it has your name on it, for Gavin Nartovich, but you will name it. And it doesn't have any dynamics. It doesn't have any fingerings or phrasing. We will put this in together, and then I'll come up with the real version. And it did like something incredible that I couldn't have imagined ever before as a teacher. Suddenly, because it was his piece, he took on ownership, had the focus, the drive, the determination, and then came up with the most wonderful title. And I was like, okay, there is something to this. And so it became a series of writing music for my students for their birthdays. My studio has since grown, and it's impossible for me to do. But then in the last few years, I've worked on publishing them, and it's everything from students who are like 4 or 5 years old to adult students, jazz and contemporary styling, or fusions and somewhat classical. And they're all what I call musical gummy vitamins. So if you've ever had a vitamin, normally it's a little tablet that you have to swallow, and it's a chore. You have to have it, and somehow magically it works and does something for your body. But gummy vitamins are so much nicer because they taste like candy, right? So then you're like, oh, it's a pleasure to take this. Maybe I can have 2 or 3, right? So this music has the nutrients, both technically and artistically, for different skills, but they're fun to play, so you don't have to force them. So maybe, Rosemary, I can send you some music at some point for your son, if you like, or for yourself.
That would
Okay.
be lovely. Thank you so much. Raphael, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
There are some for strings too. I have a really cool piece for violin and piano. It was first
Oh.
written for piano, but then I added the violin part to it. So if you have a friend who plays, remind me, Tanya, and I'll make sure I send it to you.
For sure. Thank you so much. Okay, so we are over time, but it was such a lovely, a breath of fresh air. Elizabeth, it always is a breath of fresh air to talk to you. I thank you so, so very much for all your insightful answers and expressions and the way you play and what you've shared with us. I think we're all filled with emotions and thoughts and the beginning of a new journey for what's to come ahead. So I think these breaks and these stops to really take the time and get inspired again are so necessary. So for that, I thank you so much. And I thank those of you who were able to attend, and the others will have the recording at another time. So I thank you. A round of applause for Elizabeth.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure to meet the two of you, wonderful musicians and people, and I hope we'll cross paths again. And Tanya, thank you for the trust and the wonderful experience of sharing together. We learn from each other.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. Have a great day, Elizabeth, and we talk soon.
Very good. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.